It's the Migrating to Australia podcast. I'm Grant Williams. He's David Bongiorno. Excuse me for speaking really fast because it's spring racing carnival time in Australia and we're just about to get the Melbourne Cup underway. David, we out of lockdown in Melbourne. Sydney's out of lockdown. Apparently, Australia's opened up.
262 days for Melbourne, Grant. The world's longest lockdown. We pipped this by what, 10 days?
Well, I think if you cumulatively add up how many days all of the little different postcodes in North and Western Melbourne were locked down, I think we're well ahead. But for most of Melbourne, yeah, we beat Buenos Aires. Now, I'm not sure if they're open or if they're not, but what we're going to talk about today is, even though we're really happy that we're out of lockdown and that the curfew has been lifted and we can go to the supermarket any time we want and we can walk the dog in the middle of the night if we want to, the messages that have been coming out of state governments and federal government about being open are a little bit confusing. So we're going to talk about those things today.
Look at those things and questions that we've had over the past few weeks. People have emailed in, but, you know, and as we've said in the Migrating to Australia podcast, when it's law, until then, it's mere speculation. Now, today we've got some questions. Grant, go on.
Well, we're going to time date the episode again, David, because we've been talking about the Spring Carnival. We're coming up to the
24 hours out of lockdown.
That's right, but by the time this goes out, it'll probably be just about the start of November. And certain governments have been saying, the state governments, that at the end of October, we're open up. And the federal government said travel restrictions will be off. But kind of is a load of horse crap. They're talking about international students coming back in next month. But the numbers I saw were about 120 a week into both Melbourne and Sydney. That's hardly international students opening up. Didn't we have something like 30,000 international students in Australia pre-pandemic, David?
We had a lot, and you and I have talked about how much we miss them. When they do come back, they're welcome, and we welcome them in particular. The story with what's going on in the press, read it, wait and see what happens. From November 1, we know that there will be some changes. We'll look pretty silly if we talk about them now and November 1 comes and they don't manifest. So our next podcast, we'll see what the changes are because it's a week away. And what has changed officially, we'll go into in great depth and detail.
As we always say, David, don't listen to what your auntie said or your grandpa said or your best friend who just got off a plane. Wait until it's set
in stone, Grant. That's the way to do it. People are looking at the COVID Australian website, a website for tricks and tips on coming to Australia and leaving Australia. And one of the exciting ones from November 1 is that Australian permanent residents and Australian citizens will be able to have their parents come and visit because they'll be incorporated into the definition of the meaning of a family unit, which is high time. But let's wait until November 1. And it happens on November 1 for us to talk about it because we don't know with this government whether they'll be on time. We hope they're on time or if they're late. So we'll wait till November 1 to talk about Australian family unit incorporating parents and Australian parents, parents of Australian permanent residents and parents of Australian citizens being able to come to Australia with exemptions, of course. Because remember, exemptions are still in place for most people.
That's right. And while most of the publicity has been about Australians stuck overseas and international students, and there's been a lot of talk about business migration, what we really want to talk about is, what do we think will be the situation for those international students who remained in Australia during the pandemic and the lockdowns all across the country, who were able to keep studying? What will be the situation for them, David, as they complete their courses in the next month or so, and that they're graduating either late this year or early next year, what do they need to do right now if they're on a student visa and they want to continue residency in Australia, either for further study or for work?
One of the most important things I want to look at, and we've had a few listeners ask questions about this, so it's a good time. One of the things now that Melbourne's opened up, Sydney's opened up, now the country's opened up, people must look to book and do their English tests if they're finishing their courses. They must book and do their English tests, book them, do them. Melbourne's out of lockdown and people are now able to book tests. Sydney, people can book tests. The rest of the country, IELTS, PTE tests can be done. People applying for a 485 visa before their visas expire in March of next year, that is those finishing their courses this month, next month, must book and do their tests. It's crucial.
Time's gone by. You would do your test, you would go to a location and there'd be maybe 50 to 100 people sitting down or maybe more and doing the test. Even though we're out of lockdown, there's still restrictions in place. So
check the test centres for those social distancing requirements, but book and do. We have time dated this. We're out of lockdown 24 hours in Melbourne. People should book it and do it, their test, as soon as possible because, Grant, God knows if we have another lockdown. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Now, does that mean that while we've been in lockdown, there has been no testing being carried out?
Not in Victoria, no.
Okay,
other states have had very varying degrees of lockdown and people have been able to do certain things, but now the country is open. It's really important that those who are considering applying for a 485 visa before their visas expire in March of next year do their IELTS or their PTE test.
Okay, so I think that's number one. If you have an English test requirement, now is the opportunity to go and do it.
Absolutely.
Don't. And look,
great. If people turn off now, they've got the value out of the podcast. It's that important.
Absolutely
important.
But if they do turn off now, they're going to miss this pearl of wisdom. Look, we're so sick of talking about the pandemic and of COVID and whatnot, but it just reminded me that it's only 6 months ago that the world had no idea about the Delta variant. So what I want to impress on people is the opportunity to go out and do the things that you might need, like getting your IELTS or your PTS, what are we calling it?
Pearson Test English, PTE.
Pearson testing, and go and do it now, just in case something else comes along. The same with any medical that you might need. And chase up your insurance situation. Get on top of that.
Perhaps apart from English, what also is very important apart from English, if you're a Canadian, US, UK, Irish passport holder, do your English test now. You don't need it for your 485 if you hold one of those passports, but do it now because you've got it out of the way for when you apply for a 180 visa because you'll need it for that.
And that's the important thing. The opportunity is now. If you leave it and God forbid that another variant comes along, or there are localized lockdowns, they're still talking about that, you might lose your opportunity. So please go and do it now.
People from those passport groups I mentioned do not need the test for the 485, but do it now because if there is lockdown, local lockdown, you won't have time to do it. You need it for the 189 visa, you need it for the 190 visa, and it's good for 3 years. It's good. And this is very important for those who are from Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, people from New Zealand, people from these countries do not need the test for the 485, but they need it for the 189 or the 190 for points purposes. So do it now because it's good for 3 years. Get it out of the way. Don't let it sit in the back of your mind, the back of the diary. Oh, I've got to do this before my 189 visa, before my 190 visa, before my 181, 189, 190. It's really important. Get it out of the way now.
I've been asked about a couple of visas or a couple of situations since the publicity went out that Melbourne was open, or first that Sydney was open. Backpacker visas. What's the state of play for people who want to come not only for a bit of a holiday, but to work in the agricultural sector?
They're not being processed at the moment. 417, 462. They'll open up soon. How soon? Well, remains to be seen.
How long's a piece of string?
How long's a piece of string, Grant? That's exactly right.
Now, have you seen anything about this? I know we mentioned it probably about 2 months ago. The government was talking about a special purpose agricultural visa. Has that seen the light?
Not that I've had anything to do with. It's something that's a bit of a work in progress, and it's something that when we talked about it, it's scary because it'll open up particular groups to exploitation at the hands of farmers if it's not carefully administered.
I was waiting for you to make some kind of snarky comment, David, about the Minister for Announcements or something.
No. The story is that we're in a jovial mood, comparatively speaking, because we're opening up, we've opened up, and all that's coming next month will be good, one hopes, and we hope it comes on in a timely fashion. I can't wait for November 1 and to start helping people bring their parents into Australia. Just make sure that November 1 it actually does happen. When it started,
let's talk about parents and, let's talk about grandparents as well, David. Why not? Let's cast the net widely.
Parents my age who are PR and citizen, members of the family unit include their parents. And it doesn't matter about age. Your parents will be incorporated as members of the family unit in the revised definition that's to come into play, fingers crossed, November 1.
So
what it means is Australian permanent residents, Australian citizens, will be able to have family members come and visit them, their parents come and visit them.
How widely does the definition of family go? Does that mean siblings as well?
During the COVID period, we've been able to bring in family members of family units, so husbands, wives and children. There, how I said it smoothly, sweetly, succinctly and didn't fall over my tongue. Until the change of November 1, we can bring wives in, de facto spouses in, same-sex partners in, and children until November 1. Then we'll be able to bring in addition to spouses, de facto spouses, same-sex partners, children, we'll be able to bring in mothers and fathers.
Okay, and how difficult has it been, in your experience, because you can't talk for everyone, but with the kind of clients that you've been seeing over the last couple of years, how hard has it been to get spouses into the country, potential spouses?
Now, potential spouses, there was a legislative change last month, and potential spouses, that is fiancés, can only come in on the 300 visa, the prospective marriage visa, if they have waited 1 year since lodgement and the visa has been granted. If they have waited 1 year since lodgement and the visa has been granted, they can come, was from last month before. So what it means is people can start to fly in. Fiancés will be considered, but they have to apply for an exemption. Fiancés have to apply for an exemption.
So do you expect that will change in November or December?
No, it'll start. Fiancés can apply. Fiancés can apply so long as they have a 300 visa and they've waited. It's been a year since lodgement. So somebody who lodged in March of this year, March of 2021, who's had their visa granted between now and then, can apply after the date of lodgement in March 2020, in March 2021. So if they lodged on March 20 of 2020, they can apply for an exemption and get an exemption to come to Australia from March 21, 2022. Does that make sense?
Hang on. So from March 2022, so they wouldn't be allowed to enter until March next year.
So not only 1340, but 1650. I'll make this clear. March of 2021, they lodged a visa. Let's just say 20th of March 2021. In the period between now and then, they would have had their 300 granted, but they're not allowed to enter because they're not considered members of the family unit. They've now been considered members of the family unit who have to apply for an exemption. And the exemption is this: have their visa granted, which they do, wait at least 1 year since lodgement, and then they're eligible to be exempted and to come.
Is the exemption automatic?
No, they've got to apply for it.
Okay, so you apply. So in this situation, you apply for your 300 visa in March
2020, 2021.
March 2020 or 2021.
This year.
Okay, in 2021. So you wait a year and then you can
You're
apply
eligible
for the exemption.
So long as your visa has been granted.
Okay.
Which it should have.
So that was the next question. Are they being processed in that timely manner?
Well, mine have been, yeah. Mine have been. If yours haven't been, there might be something wrong, so it's worth a discussion. But the story is people we put in prospective marriage visas for people this year, and all of them have been granted. We're just waiting now for the 1 year to come, and then they can apply to come to Australia, the exemption, and get the exemption.
Okay, so the important things are that it's 1 year from the of the application, not the date of grant. So that's your first limitation, and then
it has to be granted.
So your visa has had to have been granted in that period.
Correct, 100%.
And then you can apply for the exemption.
Correct, and you get it. So long as you've waited a year and you actually hold the prospective marriage visa.
Now, do you think there is any chance that in the medium term that requirement for an exemption will be lifted, or do you think that's a control the government will keep in place?
It's a control the government will keep in for at least a while. Absolutely. I don't see them changing that. November is going to be a dynamic month with parents being able to come in and the definition of the family unit changing, which is fantastic. But I don't see them changing something they've already recently changed in the last few weeks, last month and a bit. And that is that if you've got a 300 visa granted and you've waited a year, you can apply for an exemption to come here.
Okay, well, while we're getting confused about timelines, let's talk about timelines. When can you apply for a visa? How soon can you apply for a visa if you have graduated from?
If you've graduated, you've got to have proof you've graduated. You've got to have your letter of completion, your academic transcript. You've got to show that your uni, your college has you as marked completed, finished, successfully finished. You don't need your diploma. You don't need your degree. You don't need your proof of award. You need proof of completion. Proof of completion comes before proof of award. A lot of schools have graduation ceremonies once or twice a year. You do not need the graduation ceremony testimony to take part in a visa application. You need proof you finished your qualification, letter of completion, academic transcript.
And
with the academic transcript and letter of completion, always good to make sure that it's the final, complete, official document. Most schools, most education institutions have them on that polymer paper, like the banknote paper. You don't have a print off. You have an official completion letter, official transcript, not an interim transcript at all. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess each school will have a different way that they present a final transcript, but the department will know what each one of those is. So
if you haven't paid for it, that's a good general rule. If you haven't paid for it, it's not an official.
If you didn't get it from the registrar's office, is probably
correct. You didn't pay your 40 or 50.
If you met some dude out the back of the student cafe, that's probably not going to cut it.
If you've accessed the student portal and you've got your black and white transcript, no, that's not it. It's the official one with insignia, the signature of the registrar or the relevant officer. You do not need your actual formal qualification, though. If you have your formal qualification, that's nice, but you also need the letter of completion and academic transcript.
So if you applying for an extended visa, and we won't go over all of the different ones they can get, but basically it's going to be a 485, a graduate working visa in most
cases. If you're eligible. Correct.
again, how long is a piece of string, David? Are these visas, or have they been granted in a timely fashion?
Oh, an untrusted service certificate has just popped up on my screen, Grant. I don't trust that. I don't know what that comes from.
What are you?
For Zoom.
Have you got your email open or something?
No, it just popped up. We're talking on StreamYard. The Zoom icon just came to life, and I got the message. What was the question again? We don't have to edit that out.
The 485s, because
Look, the 485s can be processed. I mean, we have one lovely client from Europe, from a country in Europe, and hers was done.
so
There's
so
no
they are
hard and
happening
fast.
quickly.
Oh, yeah, look, they can happen quickly. They can happen slowly. It depends on how much. If you're doing it yourself, you've got to do it properly, and you've got to declare everything and show everything. And they're usually done in about 3, 4, 5 months.
Okay, well that's
good. That's
quite
good.
fast.
Well, you don't want a 485 to be fast. If you want more time in Australia to accrue work experience, you want to have a visa that takes a little bit longer, because if you've got post-study work right visa, it's 24 months. If you've got a graduate visa, it's 18 months, and 3, 4, 5 months on top for the 18-month visa, 3, 4 months on top for the 24-month visa can be very helpful.
Now that brings something to mind that we hadn't talked about, and it's not something that I've seen in the news, but amount of hours that international students were allowed to do during the pandemic was increased, David.
Yeah, for people working in certain sectors.
Now,
not for everybody.
Do you expect that will continue into next year, if we said, say, the new academic year for universities in March?
Remains to be seen. To be seen. What people
What's your
must
gut
remember,
feeling?
Oh, I'm having no carbs, so my gut's shrinking. That's why I'm feeling a bit low this past week. I've gone off the bread, off the pasta. My lunch was 450 calories, Grant.
Did you all hear that? Mr. Bongiorno is off pasta.
I'm off pasta. The Italian's off pasta, off rice, off bread. I miss bread most. And the 450 calories, I think the secret when you've got calorie-controlled food is to make it as hot as possible in flavour and temperature, so it distracts the mind from what it's missing out on.
Mate, I don't even know what a calorie is compared to a kilojoule.
But look, people, when they finish their courses, have unlimited work. What happens next year or after Christmas, because we're halfway through our migration year at Christmas, what happens in the new year, the new calendar year, remains to be seen. But people who are finishing their courses now and listening to the podcast and wanting to know what they can do, they have unlimited work rights once they finish their course. Their completion of course manifests itself in getting final results. Once you've got your final results, you're finished. When school's not in session, that's the other limb. You got your results, you're finished. School ceases to be in session once you've got your results. You don't have classes, your results are done. So when you've got your results, you're free to do what you want in terms of work, or not. You can work 100 hours a day or no hours a day. It's up to you. But you're not breaching anything, and you're not subject to the 40 hours a fortnight once you've finished your course.
Okay, so of course we've talked about the pathways for PR before, but let's just quickly skip over them. 485 graduate work visa is one.
That's for people who've completed a course of at least 2 years duration in Australia, subject to the Australian study requirement, spent the requisite time here, satisfied an occupation, satisfied completion of study that leads to them to nominate an occupation on the for a post-study work right visa or a graduate visa. As most people have finished their course, who finish their course now, have applied for and received their first student visa after 5 November 2011, they apply for the 2-year 485 visa. People who've had a visa before 5 November 2011, limited in what they can apply for. So it all depends on when they finish their course. Mostly, the cohort listening today, most of them will have applied for and received their first student visa after 5 November 2011.
I think we worked out once before, David, that there would only be a handful of people still who are...
Typically, they'd be people who've done bachelor's, master's and doctorate here, or people who've done primary, secondary school here. And there's still a few of them left in the...
Yeah. Okay. Now, what are the other ways that somebody who is here now could be applying for PR? apart from being a graduate?
If they're on a work visa, they might be applying for a 189, expression of interest in a 189 or a 190. They might be sponsored. Applying for a 186, they might be applying for, they might have, look, people, I'll tell you who's here. Students, skilled workers, and of the students and skilled workers who listen to the program, because we know a lot of students and skilled workers listen to the program, students can be applying for the 485 and then looking to express interest and apply for the 189 or the 190. There are skilled workers here who are on 482s, and the 482 visa, they might apply for another 482 visa, or they might apply for the 189, 190 if they're eligible, and they get an expression of interest that turns into an invite. People who are here who have no opportunity for a 189 or a 190, who are individuals, and they have no opportunity for a 482 and a 186 afterwards, can do the 408 COVID visa.
Now, the 408 COVID visa, are you expecting that will be continued into next year? Like, is there a time imperative for people
I think when the World Health Organization declares the COVID pandemic over, I think the 408 visa will cease. That's my belief.
Yep.
So the two will be inextricably linked. So when the World Health Organization says, "Yep, it's over," I think the 408 visa will. They'll still grant if they're still processing them, they'll honour the process. They'd be pretty mean not to. I think that probably, if there's a whole lot that still haven't been processed, I think the department might. They're not going to offer them money in 28 days to leave. That'd be pretty cruel. I think they'll grant them for a month, and then give them an opportunity with lawful status to decide what they want.
There, for the cohort that you mentioned who are here, are there timeline imperatives that people need to be aware of?
For everybody has to be aware. Well, the big one, and it may sound so basic that people might be saying, why did David and Grant need to discuss it? Well, we need to discuss it because people often forget their visa expiry dates.
Yes, you're right. And we've said it before, write it on the whiteboard, write it on your diary, put it in your phone, put it in your iPad.
Back of your bedroom door, so every time you close the door or open the door in the morning for your bedroom, 15 March 2022, 31
Tape it on your computer.
It should be like your phone number. You should know it off by heart, back to front. And one thing you mustn't do, if you need an English test for your visa, your 482 visa, your 186 visa, your 189, your 190 visa, your 491 visa, your 494 visa, your 500 visa, don't forget to do it. Don't forget to do it. Don't get so caught up in the minutiae of other aspects of life in Australia that you forget the test. Harking back to what we were saying at the start of the podcast, the story is now's the time to do it. Now's the time.
It's one of those times of year in Melbourne that's very busy anyway, with the spring racing carnival, and there's another holiday coming up, and the weather starts to get good and people start thinking about the weekends away and all that kind of stuff that we do when there's not a pandemic on. We've had the pandemic on, and now all the shopping opportunities on again, and everyone's talking about where they're going to go and what they're going to do. But are there other deadlines for any people that we can think of who are really interested in immigration that are fast approaching, David?
One really important one that you mustn't forget, and that's if you're a 461 visa holder.
461?
Yeah, if you have a New Zealand partner, unlike an 820 when you get permanent residency, 801 when you get permanent residency, with an 801 you get permanent residency. And if you do not travel and more than 5 years elapse, your lawful status is still maintained. It's just your travel facility that you need to apply for a resident return visa for. With a 461, once your visa expires, you're unlawful. So people who are on a 461 every 4 3/4 years must apply for a new 461, irrespective of whether if they're with the same partner, they still have to do it. If they've broken up, they have to do it. We won't go into what happens when you get another partner. That's a whole new podcast in its own. But a person who's on a 461 needs to be mindful of the 5 years and fast approaching deadlines.
Now, you mentioned New Zealand. Does that people on a 461 only from New Zealand?
partnered up to a Kiwi in Australia. You know how, as half of New Zealand lives here, and we love having them because they're generally nicer than us, Aussies, generally. What happens is this: if you marry or partner up with a New Zealander and do a 461 visa, you being the overseas applicant or onshore, offshore, your visa only goes for 5 years. And you've got to renew and apply for a new 461.
Now,
a new 461.
I think we need to walk through that just a little bit for people who aren't Australians or New Zealanders.
If you've got a Kiwi partner and you're in Australia and you marry de facto, register, if you're coupled with a Kiwi and you and the Kiwi want to stay together in Australia, the Kiwi and you lodge what's called a 461 visa. The 461 visa allows the couple, the partner, the de facto partner, same-sex partner, married partner of the Kiwi to stay in Australia for 5 years when the visa is granted.
And for anyone saying, why is that? That's because we have closer economic relations is the official term with New Zealand. We have special arrangements for New Zealand permanent residents and citizens to have residency rights in Australia. Now, obviously, that
Kiwis have what are called special category visas.
Yeah. So obviously, if someone who is a New Zealand citizen or permanent resident begins a genuine relationship with somebody, no matter where they're from, they take on extra rights rather than somebody who...
A New Zealand citizen who lives here, who marries someone or de factos with someone who's not from Australia and is on a temporary visa, needs to lodge a 461. Now, that 461 keeps the person who's not an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident in Australia with the New Zealand citizen. Now, the New Zealand citizen...
Is that the 5 year?
Yeah. And what happens...
So that's got the period of 5 years.
But
so this is what you're saying, you must reapply if that 5 year time is coming up?
Before it's expired.
Yeah.
Correct. And even if you divorce the New Zealand citizen or break up with a New Zealand citizen, you can stay as a single person and apply for a new 461 visa. You get in trouble and you need to talk to me or someone else who can help you if you break up and shack up.
Yep.
So if you partner up with someone else, you've got to look at a different visa for that. And we should actually do a podcast on that, Grant, because there's half of New Zealand lives here.
Let me just clarify one detail about timeline. Is the 5 years from date of entry into Australia or date of entry of the granting of the visa?
It's different. What happens is when it's done on shore, it's from the grant of the visa.
Okay.
The grant of the visa. So an Italian guy meets a New Zealand girl or a New Zealand guy, and the story is love at first sight. They do a 461 visa. Once that they take forever to grant, so you have the bonus time of being together on a bridging visa A. Be very careful when you do this, because if you are the hypothetical Italian who comes and falls in love off a visitor visa, you have no work rights for the whole process of the visa. That's a very dangerous trap that a lot of people fall into who partner up with New Zealanders and do 461s. You inherit the conditions of the visa you're on, whereas if you apply for a partner visa with an Australian, you inherit the conditions of the visa you're applying for. So if you're on shore and you lodge on shore and you lodge off an electronic travel authority or a visitor visa, you'll have no work rights for the duration of the processing of the 461, which can be 3-4 years. Then
so is it better for an overseas person who is onshore? Yeah, that was what I was going to say. You'd always want to positively discriminate towards an Australian citizen rather than a Kiwi.
See what happens. It's a serious problem. If someone flies in from the United States, falls in love and does a 461 visa with a New Zealand citizen here in Australia, they've come on electronic travel authority. That has no work rights. So for when they go into a bridging visa A for Apple, they'll inherit the conditions of the visa they had. Whereas if you come from Italy or America or wherever you come from and fly into Australia on electronic travel authority and do a partner visa that you're eligible for with an Australian PR, Australian citizen, you get full work rights when you go onto the bridging visa because you've partnered up with an Australian and you're inheriting the conditions of the visa you're applying for.
They're still traps.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. And what you've got to do, the condition, or another common one is if people are on a work visa, a 482 working visa, and they do a partner visa with a Kiwi. They're supposed to stay with their employer for the duration of the process, and if they split with their employer, they're in breach of what's called an 8107 condition. You're supposed to, if you come here on a work visa, you're supposed to stay with that employer. If you don't stay with that employer, you've got to find another employer. If you don't find another employer or the visa expires, you've got to stay with that employer because 8107 condition is what you're guided by on the bridging visa for the 461. Because with the 461, you inherit the conditions of the visa you're on. With an 82801, you inherit the conditions of the visa you're applying for.
Is that something people, in your experience, commonly?
Absolutely. 100%. All the time. All the time. So what you've got to apply for if you partner up with a Kiwi is a removal of the 8107 condition. You've got to demonstrate financial hardship. You demonstrate financial hardship by making submission to the department. My bridging visa A, which has the 8107 condition, here are my bank balances, here are my ingoings, my outgoings, here is my savings account. I do not have enough money to live. My former employer was not very pleasant, or my former employer and I have parted because the visa expired and I thought I could. You can't. You're supposed to stay for the bridging visa. If you apply for a 461 and you're on a 482, you're supposed to stay with your employer or apply for another 482 before the current one expires.
Situation.
It's very confusing. And people fall foul. It's very confusing.
Can I put a scenario that I could see happening is that you've got somebody who's got their work rights
on a 482 working visa.
They're working and they meet a Kiwi.
Yep.
And a beautiful relationship begins, and the Kiwi decides that their destiny does not lie in Melbourne or Sydney, and that they accept a job in Darwin.
Yep.
So they go to Darwin, and international boyfriend / girlfriend / same-sex partner who has been working on the 482 decides, I'm going to go to Darwin with my new Kiwi significant other. They resign and they head off to Darwin.
They've got to find a new sponsor in Darwin.
Now, do they need to find a new employer / sponsor before they resign?
It's safer to. If they don't, the clock starts ticking. You do it behind closed doors. It's like somebody with a job. If somebody's got a job and they want to transfer, they make sure they line up their other job first before they leave the job they have. To do it any other way is crazy.
Now, if you find another employer
sponsor
in Darwin,
Yep.
Is that an easy process to change?
No, not unless you've done some groundwork and you've got some contacts and the business is suitable and they do the appropriate labour market. There's a whole host of considerations. Yeah. It's not easy deliberately.
Well,
it's very confusing, and a lot of people will be listening going, what's going on? Well, to simplify...
I've got two tips. One, don't do it. Or
don't do it.
Contact David Bongiorno.
Correct. Before you consider doing anything, do not leave off a 482 without having organised a new sponsor. If you leave a 482, you've got time constraints to get a new sponsor, and it's very dangerous. If you leave and do nothing, you're in breach of 8107 after 60 days.
So 60 days. Well, it's been a pretty heavy kind of episode, David, with lots of really intense deadlines and stipulations.
Yeah, not fun, light and breezy, is it, really?
Particularly since, David, did you know lockdown's over and the curfew's been lifted?
We should be happy dancing in the streets.
Doesn't help with that.
The most annoying thing for me of the lockdown was the curfew, the 9 p.m. curfew.
Are you one of those people who wants to go and walk their dog at midnight?
Yeah, absolutely. Or work till midnight. Story is, the curfew is
Oh, yeah, that's right. If you're staying late in the office, I guess I wouldn't have noticed that because I do all my work here. in my cubby hole. Are there other things we want to bring to mind today, David, that are really important in terms of deadlines or pros and cons as we run into the end of the year?
Oh, look, common mistakes or common problems when people come to the end of the year, if their visas are expiring in March 15, 2022 in this scenario, is leaving their English tests, is thinking that they can apply in January, February. What you've got to remember, half of Australia, or most of Australia, we go to sleep from about December 21, 22 to about the end of the first week of January. So there's a lot of time lost. People who need to do English tests miss out if they don't book and do them before Christmas. Somebody who's wanting to do a 485 should be looking to lodge it just before Christmas or just after in January and the New Year, so long as they've got everything organised. Don't leave it to the last minute, because lockdowns and subsequent lockdowns could mean you may not be able to do an English test. If you fail, that's a bit of a disaster. If you fail a subject, you might, depending on when the supplementary exam is, you might have to apply for another student visa. Then the problem is, how long will it take for that student visa to process? And then everything, if there's one deviation, that upsets the apple cart and things go everywhere.
Yeah, and you've got the potential for snowballing.
And what happens is the visa doesn't get granted, and you're on a bridging visa, and there's all these timing considerations. But look, we can't get technical because it will confuse people. People who have specific technical issues can reach out to me via Twitter at David Bongiorno or via the podcast through you, Grant.
Or
November 1.
At _A_C_Bon. You worked really hard to get that one.
I was so slow to get onto Instagram, I missed out on at David Bongiorno. But as soon as I've been on Twitter since about 2009, 2010. But Instagram, I'm late to the Instagram party. One party I've never come to because I just don't understand it. I hear it's good, is Reddit. Do you do
Reddit? I think it's good for particular interests. What I'm really hanging out for Donald Trump's new social media platform that he's about to launch. I reckon that'll be a real ripper.
How long will that last? What
about as long as his last one.
That's it. What do they promise? Non-woke entertainment. He's an idiot. He's a goose. He's a goose.
What truth something. Imagine that word having any relationship with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap this one up. There's
I suppose just to recap from the start, really exciting development, but until it's happened, it hasn't happened. It's from 1 November, the changing in the definition of a family unit to incorporate parents of Australian citizens and Australian permanent residents, adult children who have mum and dad in country outside Australia, or they can travel to Australia to see their children they haven't seen, their adult children. So that means that people who've got their PR, got their citizenship as permanent, Alpha 189 or 190, 820, 801, 801 visa, 309, 100, any adult who's been missing mum and dad who's a citizen or a permanent resident can bring mum and dad to Australia because they will be considered immediate family members. Now, the thing is this, what you've got to do, though, is apply for an exemption. You have to apply for an exemption. So if mum and dad were from the United States, they're part of a special trial program to use the app for an electronic travel authority. Only 5-6 countries can do it that way. Otherwise, you do a 600 visa. If mum and dad are from the States or mum and dad are from Singapore, they can get an electronic travel authority to come to Australia. Then they must get an exemption to enter Australia. See, without the exemption to enter Australia, the visa's no good, or the electronic travel authority is no good. If you're applying for your parents from or a country that's not part of the trial app, ETA app, Italy, you do a 600 visa, but you do the exemption first, and then you put a 600 visa in to bring mum and dad here. That said, the trial program for the ETA app may be abolished, and it might be open to people. We don't know. So that's why November 1, next podcast, we'll get down and dirty and concrete with it all. But don't be applying to bring mum and dad in yet. Wait till November 1. make sure you're an Australian permanent resident, make sure you're an Australian citizen, and look to the podcast for some guidance. But don't rely on all you hear, because this is a program of general nature, Grant. And what happens to people who rely on information of a general nature?
They are drongos, David, or galahs, and they really should seek individual professional advice from someone such as yourself, and they can easily do that by reaching out to you on Twitter at David Bongiorno.
Today is the 23rd. We're 24 hours, a bit longer out of lockdown here in Melbourne, and parents are not part of the family unit yet. A spouse is, a same-sex spouse is, a de facto partner is, a same-sex de facto partner is, a child, a dependent child is. They are. But November 1, remember everyone, from November 1, we're looking at Australian family unit definition incorporating Australian permanent resident, Australian citizen, adult Australian permanent resident, adult Australian citizens, parents as part of the family unit.
Now, David, I'm just going to let everyone know that the most exciting thing about the lifting of lockdown, curfews,
for you or me or for all of us,
opened up, well, I think it's going to be for both of us, is that it's not long until we'll be able to welcome a guest into the great Migrating to Australia David Bongiorno boardroom and actually sight them face to face and do podcasting the old school way. Remember that?
Face to face, 5 feet apart. It'll be a long time. We've been divided by geography through lockdown for God.
I think we worked it out. We've been clearly 2 years, I think. Since we, I think it's 2 years next month that because we had a bit of time where we weren't going into the office. I think you had a break. I had a little break where we didn't get into the office, and we started doing remote conferencing and podcasting before it was cool, Dave. We were trendsetters and we didn't even know it.
And we didn't even do it on Teams or Zoom. We did it on wonderful StreamYard.
I had to use Teams this week. Wow.
Oh, it's easier. It's better than Zoom.
Well, yeah, but yeah.
And Zoom, if you're a cheap Charlie, it clocks out after 40 minutes.
Well, it's a long time since I've
not a good look if you're talking to someone. I use Teams because you can talk at it.
Yeah, well, there we are. We're talking about all kinds of things that don't revolve around immigration, but I hope you're feeling as positive about the future as David and I am, because, as we've said before, lockdown, curfew, it's all gone in the city that we live in, and we might be able to have a coffee together very soon, David.
I tell you what, it may have been 2 years, but the coffee downstairs is still excellent. It's still wonderful. This is a free plug to Frankie, and Frankie has taken, I don't know, he and his wonderful team have taken thousands of orders from you and I over the years. We've drunk our share of coffee down there. It's Bench Coffee, 431 St Kilda. Second best coffee shop in Melbourne. I won't tell you which is the best coffee shop in Melbourne. It's the second best.
Keeping it to yourself.
I'm keeping the best coffee shop all to myself. But Frankie's is a close second.
And look, well done to everyone who's been able to keep working while all this palaver has been going on, keeping yourselves safe, keeping your employees safe. And let's look forward to a happy and successful summertime. David Bongiorno, Australia's
Clean shaven today.
You're the pastor-phobic Italian background migration lawyer.
I'll tell you what, it's very hard not to have pasta. It's very hard. It's part of the makeup.
Who hasn't been eating it for about almost 2 years.
You've been off it for 2 years. That's fantastic, because
I hardly touch it. I have.
The craving for it never goes away. And tortellini, the filled pastas, I'm a big fan of the short pasta. Rigatoni is my favourite. I just miss how it captures the sauces, and I miss the bread for the mopping up. We touch on all of these things, and this is why I'm a little bit bigger than I should be, because I like bread and I like pasta. I like exercise, but not as much as eating.
Well, on that note, thanks for listening to Migrating to Australia.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Ciao.